There are rare moments in history when a leader doesn't just speak, he dares to say the very thing the world is trying to avoid. A moment when truth is placed on the table, raw and cold, without sugarcoating, without disguise. And today in Africa, no one does that more powerfully than President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. He does not seek comfort. He does not wait for applause. He does not speak to please anyone. He speaks because he must. And this time, the people he wants to warn are the women of Africa. Do not let yourselves be lulled into believing that the West is a paradise, he declared. Many will attack me for saying this, but I cannot remain silent while so many of our women walk towards suffering they cannot yet see. These words were not an attack on the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, or Australia. They were not a rejection of Western achievements. They were the warning of a leader who understands a truth that many refuse to face. Africa is awakening, and if you believe that, you must hear this story. Traoré chose to speak at a moment when the world was splitting into two contradictory directions. In Africa, more and more young women were preparing to leave their homelands, convinced that their future lay across the ocean. But at that exact moment, the West was entering one of its most turbulent periods in decades. Inflation was spiraling out of control. Wages were standing still. Housing costs soared beyond reach. Healthcare, education, transportation cracking from within. Even native families who had lived in those nations for generations no longer believed they could live comfortably as before. Many were forced to cut every possible expense, postpone every dream, and survive in a long, grinding cycle of insecurity. This is the part of the truth that many African women never hear. And Traoré knew that if he didn't say it, no one would. Between 2023 and 2025, migration data revealed that women had become the largest group applying for relocation. Not because they sought luxury, but because they felt suffocated by lives with too few opportunities, too little protection, and too much uncertainty. They were not running to the West, they were running away from pain. But what awaited them in the West was nothing like the polished story sold online. It was months of exhausting labor, a cultural shock so deep it strangles loneliness into your chest. Bills piling up faster than income, financial traps that hold people hostage for years. Nights of silence, crying with no one to confide in. No one warns them. No one tells them the reality. And Traoré chose to break that silence. His message was not political. It was human, painfully human. He wanted African women to understand that the West of today is not the promised land they imagine. And leaving without understanding this could push them into a life even more bitter than the one they are trying to escape. A truth many prefer to bury. A truth he refuses to sweeten. And from that truth, a larger story begins, darker, more complex, and far more important than any simple dream of migration. And this is only the opening chapter of a deeper reality that very few dare to confront. For many African women, the thought of leaving home does not begin with ambition. It begins with exhaustion, the quiet, heavy kind that settles into a person after years of fighting battles no one sees. President Ibrahim Traoré understood this deeply. Before he confronted the illusion of Western paradise, he first acknowledged the very real pain that pushes women to consider leaving their home countries in the first place. In countless African communities, women grow up carrying responsibilities that weigh heavier than their years. Tradition often demands silence, obedience, and sacrifice. Opportunities for education or stable employment are limited. Safety is not always guaranteed. Many women exist in environments where they must protect themselves, protect their children, and sometimes protect their dreams from being crushed by cultural expectations or economic reality. These pressures compound quietly. A girl learns early to lower her voice. A mother learns to endure hunger so her children can eat. A wife learns that her labor is expected but her ambitions are optional. And over time, a seed begins to grow inside many women, a belief that happiness must exist somewhere else, anywhere else, as long as it is far from the life they already know. By the time they reach adulthood, this seed has often become a simple but dangerous idea. If I can just get out of here, everything will be better. Traoré pointed out that this belief, though understandable, is exactly what puts women at risk. Desperation creates vulnerability. Vulnerability creates illusions. And illusions make the promises of Western life appear brighter than they truly are. He warned that painful circumstances at home can turn migration into a fantasy, a shining exit door that looks like freedom, but may lead to a different kind of captivity. For many women, The West becomes not a destination but an escape route from poverty, instability, or loneliness. And when a person is running from suffering, they rarely stop to question what they might be running into. A truth many prefer to bury. A truth he refuses to sweeten. But what he said next was even more urgent. The West they believe will save them is no longer the West it once was. And it is precisely at this point that his warning enters its most controversial phase. President Ibrahim Traoré did not soften his words when he described the psychological trap many African women unknowingly fall into. He explained that when hardship becomes a daily companion, the human mind begins crafting an escape, not a plan, not a strategy, but an emotional fantasy. And in recent years, that fantasy has increasingly centered on the West. In social media videos, television series, and the curated lives of influencers, Western countries appear calm, orderly, wealthy, and full of endless opportunity. Women see clean streets, furnished apartments, sparkling city centers, and smiling families. They see a world where problems seem smaller and solutions seem closer. But what they do not see, because almost no one shows it, is the cost of surviving in those environments, the loneliness that comes with cultural displacement, and the silent battles immigrants fight behind closed doors. Traoré warned that this one-sided image is dangerous, because while Western media exports beauty, it rarely exports struggle. And so African women begin to believe not just that life will be better abroad, but that life will be easier abroad, a belief he described as the beginning of heartbreak. He emphasized that women who leave their home countries carrying emotional wounds often become the easiest targets for exploitation overseas. When you think a place will save you, you stop questioning the risks. When you believe a man abroad will treat you better than the men you grew up with, you may fail to see the warning signs. And when you imagine that a Western job will immediately lift you into financial security, you may overlook the high cost of living, the taxes, the debt traps, and the relentless grind that can break even the strongest spirits. According to Traoré, the West does not intentionally deceive African women, but the polished surface of Western life hides realities that newcomers only discover when it's too late. He stressed that many women who leave are not traveling toward opportunity. They are traveling toward an illusion built from fragments of truth mixed with mountains of misunderstanding. And this illusion is powerful because it grows in soil watered by pain. Pain from poverty, pain from insecurity, pain from feeling unseen or undervalued. Traoré's message was clear. If you leave because you believe the West is perfect, you are walking into a storm without knowing you are already standing in the rain. His words were not meant to frighten, they were meant to anchor. To remind African women that the choice to leave should be informed, not imagined. Grounded in reality, not in the edited highlights of another society. And with that understanding, the story now moves to an even harsher truth. The West itself is struggling, and the paradise being imagined no longer exists as it did before. When President Ibrahim Traoré shifted from psychology to reality, his tone hardened. He was no longer speaking about dreams or illusions, he was speaking about the Western systems that have been deteriorating quietly while the world continues to see them through an outdated lens. He began with education, an institution long praised as one of the West's greatest strengths. But from 2023 through 2025, classrooms in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Europe have faced historic strain. Schools are overcrowded, teachers are exhausted, funding gaps widen each year, and then came the cultural shock, something few African families were prepared for. Children as young as 6 or 7 are introduced to complex themes of gender identity, ideology, and social debates that even adults struggle to navigate. For many immigrant parents, this isn't just confusing, it is terrifying. They find themselves unable to protect their children from ideas they never encountered or agreed to, and they have little influence over what is taught. Traoré warned that the cultural mismatch is not small, it shakes many families to their core. Then he turned to healthcare, the system often believed to be the best in the world. But in reality, Western healthcare has increasingly become a battlefield of long waiting lists, overworked medical staff, and patients who spend months, sometimes years, waiting for procedures. In the United Kingdom, some surgeries require 1 to 4 years of waiting. In Canada, emergency rooms have become so overwhelmed that people call ambulances simply to secure a chance at being seen. Even in the United States, the cost of care puts millions into debt, forcing them to choose between health and financial survival. You will be shocked, Traoré said, when you see how a system that claims to be the most advanced cannot even care properly for its own people. And then there is the broader social environment. From 2022 to 2025, strikes, protests, and labor unrest have surged across France, Germany, the United Kingdom, Portugal, and even the US. Rail workers, nurses, doctors, teachers, entire sectors have walked out, demanding relief from unbearable working conditions. This is not the image the world sees in movies or social media. This is not the paradise many African women expect to find. This is a West struggling under the weight of its own promises. And Traoré warned that anyone who enters such a society without understanding these fractures is stepping into instability, not opportunity. One of the most controversial parts of Traoré's warning involved relationships, an area many African women rarely question when imagining life abroad. Videos on TikTok and Instagram often portray Western men as gentle, supportive, emotionally mature, and free from the patriarchal attitudes women face at home. This portrayal is powerful, and for women who have experienced trauma or neglect, it is deeply appealing. But Traoré insisted that this image is incomplete. He stated plainly that many Western men are not the romantic ideals seen online. Some are lonely, struggling financially, dealing with emotional instability, or seeking relationships not based on love, but on utility. Immigrant women, especially African women who arrive hopeful and isolated, can easily become targets for exploitation. He spoke bluntly. Some Western men do not see African women as partners. They see them as domestic workers with legal papers, as caregivers, or even as a way to access government benefits. For women who left Africa believing they were escaping hardship, this reality is devastating. Instead of finding protection, they may face new forms of dependency. Instead of being valued, they may be treated as assets or burdens. And when domestic problems arise, immigrant women often have little support. Family is far away. Community structures are weak. Cultural misunderstandings lead to conflict. Language barriers make it difficult to defend themselves. And the legal system, though developed, can feel cold and confusing. Traoré's tone grew heavier when he described how these women end up trapped. No savings, no property, no strong social connections, and children who have formed identities far removed from their mother's culture. Returning home becomes nearly impossible, emotionally, financially, and socially. He warned that even love, the most powerful motivation for migration, can turn into a prison when built on fantasy instead of truth. And all of this unfolds while another dramatic shift takes place. Western citizens themselves are leaving their own countries in growing numbers, a reversal that exposes the depth of Western decline. As President Ibrahim Traoré expanded on his warning, he pointed to a phenomenon that many Africans rarely consider: a quiet exodus happening inside the West itself. While African women are risking everything to enter the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia, millions of Western citizens have been moving in the opposite direction. It is a reversal that reveals far more about the state of the West than any political speech could. In the United Kingdom, families have been relocating to Australia and New Zealand in search of better weather, lower crime, and more affordable living. In the United States, a growing number of professionals, doctors, engineers, entrepreneurs have started leaving for the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, drawn by safer cities, tax advantages, and stronger job markets. Across Europe, thousands of retirees and remote workers are moving to Africa itself, to South Africa, Kenya, Rwanda, Namibia, because life there feels more stable and more financially realistic. The narrative that everyone wants to move west is no longer true. The world has changed dramatically. Traoré asked a question that stung with uncomfortable honesty. Across Europe, thousands of retirees and remote workers are moving to Africa itself, to South Africa, Kenya, Rwanda, Namibia, because life there feels more stable and more financially realistic. It is a question Western journalists seldom address, because acknowledging it would undermine decades of messaging about Western superiority. But statistics tell a different story. Western societies are aging, their infrastructures are overburdened, their job markets are contracting, their cost of living is rising far faster than their wages, and their social systems, once models of stability, are weakening under the weight of global crises. Meanwhile, Africa, often portrayed as vulnerable, is the continent with the youngest population, the most unused land, and the fastest growing cities. Foreign investors see what many Africans overlook. China, the Middle East, And even European companies are redirecting capital into African infrastructure, mining, manufacturing, and energy. Traoré's message was not anti-Western, it was pro-reality. He urged African women to understand that the world's power centers are shifting, and that betting their entire future on a declining West is not just risky, it is blind to opportunity at home. And that shift sets the stage for an even deeper consequence: the personal cost women face when they enter the West during its most turbulent era. From the perspective of many Americans, especially those over the age of 40, the United States today no longer resembles the country they grew up in. They see rising crime in major cities, homelessness expanding into suburbs, wages falling behind inflation, and a political climate that feels divided beyond repair. Many express that the American dream is not dead, but it is harder than ever to reach. This is the context African women walk into. For many older Americans, this isn't surprising. They have watched the erosion for decades: the decline of manufacturing jobs, the collapse of small towns, the rise of student debt, and the squeeze placed on working-class families. What shocks them, however, is seeing immigrants arrive with the belief that the US will instantly solve their problems. Many Americans themselves are struggling to pay rent, afford healthcare, or secure stable work. So when African women arrive expecting ease, they step into a reality even native-born citizens are grappling with. Traoré understood this contradiction. He understood that entering America today means entering a system where millions of people, including Americans, are barely holding on. For immigrants, the struggle is even harder. They lack family networks. They lack generational wealth. They lack social safety nets. And they lack the cultural familiarity that helps people navigate crises. From the global perspective, Western nations are no longer the undisputed centers of opportunity. Power is shifting to Asia, to the Middle East, and slowly but unmistakably to Africa. The world is diversifying, decentralizing, and moving toward new economic hubs. And yet, African women are often making life decisions based on the reputation the West had 20, 30, even 40 years ago, a reputation that no longer matches present reality. This mismatch between expectation and reality is exactly what leads so many women into disappointment, exhaustion, and emotional collapse. They arrive seeking stability, but find instability. They arrive seeking community, but find isolation. They arrive seeking safety, but encounter an entirely different set of dangers: guns, gang violence, overstressed police forces, and neighborhoods struggling with poverty. For Traoré, the greatest tragedy is not that African women migrate, it is that they migrate, believing they are running toward a miracle, when in truth they may be running into a storm that the West itself is still trying to survive. And now, with the global context laid bare, the story reaches its turning point, the twist that elevates Traoré from a simple political leader into a symbol of Africa's awakening. The twist in President Ibrahim Traoré's warning does not come from despair. It comes from revelation. For decades, African families were told that progress flowed in only one direction, from west to east, from north to south, from the wealthy world into the developing one. But by 2025, the signs were unmistakable. The world had shifted, and the map of opportunity was no longer oriented around Western capitals. He spoke bluntly. Some Western men do not see African women as partners. They see them as domestic workers with legal papers, as caregivers, or even as a way to access government benefits. He explained that while African women are running toward the West is quietly turning its eyes toward Africa, not out of charity, but out of necessity. With aging populations, shrinking workforces, rising social costs, and weakening economic engines, Western nations are losing the very advantages that once made them magnets for global ambition. Meanwhile, Africa's population is young, energetic, and rapidly urbanizing. Its land is fertile, its mineral reserves essential to the world's technology boom, and its markets are expanding faster than almost anywhere else on Earth. In other words, the future is no longer happening away from Africa, it is happening inside Africa. China saw it early. The Middle East sees it now. Western investors, reluctantly but inevitably, are beginning to see it too. But African women, those who should benefit first, are often the last to recognize the opportunity growing beneath their own feet. This is the twist Traoré wanted the world to understand. Migration is not just movement. Migration reveals belief. And when African women flee their homeland for the West, they are not only escaping hardship, they are unintentionally abandoning the very continent the world is preparing to compete for. The paradise they chase is fading. but the paradise they leave behind is rising. The second twist, the emotional one, is that Traoré's message is not simply a geopolitical analysis. It is a defense of African dignity, spoken by a leader who refuses to let his people forget their worth. He reminded African women that they are not bystanders in the story of Africa's rise, they are its foundation. He emphasized that Africa cannot be rebuilt by men alone. The rebirth of a continent requires mothers, educators, entrepreneurs, farmers, innovators, and leaders, roles that African women have carried for generations, often without recognition. If these women continue leaving, he warned, Africa's revival will be delayed, diluted, or stolen by those who see opportunity where Africans see struggle. And this is where Traoré's voice shifts from leader to guardian. He tells women, do not let the world convince you that your future is somewhere else. What you are seeking abroad may already exist here waiting for you to build it. In that moment, his warning becomes empowerment. The danger becomes a call to purpose. The migration crisis becomes a mirror reflecting the continent's untapped power. Traoré's twist is simple but transformative. Africa is no longer the continent that must chase the world. It is the continent the world is beginning to chase. And in this new reality, African women are no longer refugees or dreamers. They are the authors of Africa's next chapter, a chapter the West itself may one day look toward for guidance, stability, and hope. This twist does more than flip the narrative. It elevates Traoré from a president issuing a warning to a symbol calling an entire generation home. In the end, President Ibrahim Traoré's message was never about fear. It was never meant to intimidate, and it was never meant to stop anyone from moving forward. It was a call to awaken, a reminder to look directly at the truth, without illusions, without borrowed dreams, without painting over the harshness of reality. He wanted African women and the entire world to understand something that should have been obvious but has been forgotten through generations. A person's worth is not determined by how far they travel, nor by the brightness of skylines built on another continent. Africa is not a place to run away from. Africa is a place to return to, a land being reborn painfully, boldly, beautifully, a continent rising from its deepest wounds to rewrite its own destiny. Ibrahim Traoré sees this, and he wants African women to see it too. He urged them to rediscover the power they already possess. Lands fertile enough to feed entire nations, if only allowed to flourish. Communities that protect, uplift, and heal one another, something the West is slowly losing. A continent now drawing the attention of major economic powers, tech giants, energy investors, and nations racing to claim a share of Africa's future. He reminded them that dignity is not found by abandoning where you come from. It is found by building a life where your roots are strongest. Because roots never betray you, but borrowed dreams on foreign soil often do. And as Africa rises fiercely and irreversibly, as Burkina Faso becomes a symbol of sovereignty and awakening, as global narratives about Africa shift from tragedy to expectation, Traoré's message echoes louder than ever. The world is changing, and Africans must not abandon the soil that is finally beginning to bloom. Do not hand your future to nations exhausted by economic crises. Do not believe dignity exists beyond the ocean. Do not lose yourself by running from challenges that are, in fact, opportunities to rebuild. There are moments in history when a people must choose, run away or rise. And today, Traoré wants African women, those who bear the most, endure the most, sacrifice the most, to be the first to rise, to look at Africa's future with clarity and confidence. He ended his speech with words that have become a rallying cry across the continent, from Ouagadougou to Dakar, from Bamako to Kinshasa, a declaration that asks permission from no one. We do not ask for permission to be free. We stand up and claim it. It is no longer just a sentence. It is a vow, a declaration from a new Africa, unbowed, unapologetic, and unafraid. If the spirit of Ibrahim Traoré touches your heart, share this story. Follow the journey of an Africa rising with its head held high, rewriting its own future, refusing to bend to anyone,